I'm a bit stuffed up this week, so if any of you watched a presidential debate 2 weeks ago, I'm going to sound a little bit like Trump. I'll be sniffling about every 2 minutes. So hopefully it's not too distracting. Hello, everyone, and I thank you for coming this week. The timing for giving this message was good because we don't have a Seahawks game this week. That's good news for me because I don't feel like I'm rushed because everyone wants to get home and watch a game. The bad news for you is that I might go another 10 or 15 minutes because afterwards we have a council meeting, so I want to put off that a little. I'll make sure to make it exciting, though. It's been a while since I spoke to all of you. The last time I spoke was actually in Kenya, and that time it was a little different. I was speaking with an interpreter, so I had to be a lot more simplified in my English and a lot more slow because they would repeat what I said. So it was a different experience, and I was never quite sure if they were hearing what I was saying. Because we learned a little bit of Swahili over there, but not a whole lot. And the worst thing was I didn't know I was speaking, so I had forgot to bring over a bow tie. So that kind of threw me off. But I hope that you today are blessed as much as they said they were blessed. And you should also be happy. One of the big differences between there and here is their main church furniture was plastic lawn chairs. And that's actually the truth. If you weren't here for the last 2 weeks, Carrie spoke on the prologue of 1 John. John chapter 1, in which John was speaking about the deity of Christ and how Jesus was the Word and the Word became God and the Word became flesh. For those of you who were here, I suggest going back and rewatching those. And if you weren't here, I suggest catching them because that's kind of John's foundation for the rest of his book. He lays down his theology, and then he gets into the narrative. But if we don't get the theology right, then we won't build the narrative on a proper foundation. And I think part of the reason why you come here on Sunday, why we're doing Wednesday, is because just like in John's day, when their theology got off track, he was using his gospel to put them back on track. We need today to study amongst ourselves and in a group to sync our theology up with what we read in the Word of God every week, our theology and our doctrine. So I hope that you can do that here on Sundays. We had a big crowd on Wednesday, and there's still plenty of chairs, and I hope you can do that. And I also hope you go back, read the first chapter. And this week we're moving forward in our study of John into John chapter 2. Some of you may remember a while back, Carrie and I tag teamed on a series called Sunday School Stories, All Growed Up. The premise of that series was to take familiar stories from our childhood and look at them through adult eyes, to see the characters and stories with the depth and nuance that we hopefully get as an adult. and see the characters as three-dimensional characters and not just felt flat characters on a board. And I approach this story the same way as I approach those stories. Because a lot of us, probably the first book we read, the first gospel we read, even if it might even be the first book, was the Gospel of John. It's what we pass out to new converts. And we might have just read over the first chapter, not knowing what it meant. And when we get to the stories of the miracles, we might read them not knowing the depth that's kind of hidden in them. So, Rome, we're going to start reading the text now. If you have your phones open to John 2. If you have your phones open to John 2, verse 1. In case you're ever wondering how to sync your phone up with what I'm talking about, and I think Carrie has started doing this. I honestly don't know why, but I use the ESV, so if you want to, on your deal, I use the ESV for my reading. So it doesn't get too messed up in your mind. Okay, verse 1. On the third day there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "We have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, Now draw some out, and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. And when the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, although the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. First off, let's look at the situation here. Christ and his disciples are in Galilee, and we can assume they're doing ministry. If you did read chapter 1, towards the end there, Christ calls his first disciples. So at this point, Christ already has a group following him. They get invited to a wedding. We can assume that these were friends or family, as Jesus' mother and brothers were there. The wedding festival also seemed to have gone multiple days. I believe it said there, the third day. So they were on the third day of this wedding. In my study, I didn't get a clear sense of how long exactly Jewish weddings were. However, we can know for sure that this wedding went on for a while, which really surprises me because after the reception of my wedding, Shannon and I were just about beat. And I don't think we could go 2 or 3 more days partying. But Unlike the image we get of people in the Bible sometimes, they actually loved to party. And God, even in the Old Testament, had feasts multiple times a year. And these were basically sacred parties where they would eat and drink and have fun. So when it came to this wedding, they were apparently the third day into this wedding feast. And they were apparently having such a good time that they ran out of wine, which led to the request that Mary made. Mary comes up to tell Jesus that they don't have any wine. At first reading, this doesn't seem to be a thing to bother Jesus with. When I first read it, I thought it seemed kind of a trivial matter. But as I read some commentaries and some study guides, in that culture, it was a great social embarrassment to not be a good host. And if indeed this party were expected to last more days, running out of wine was, at the very least, very embarrassing. I was talking with Carrie and expressing kind of my amazement at how in America this isn't such a big deal. But he told me that I'm, in essence, a terrible party host. And that, because for me, if you run out of food at the party, then I'm like, well, hey, there's a Arby's right down the road. They have chili fries, $3.99. But he explained that for some of the ladies in church, if they threw a party and they ran out of food, it would be terrible embarrassment. So even in our culture, we understand that. And we also understood it on our trip, where almost every house we went to, they served to us more food in one meal than they probably ate in a month. All the stringy, dry chicken you could ever want to eat. You ought to be thankful for the hormone drugged up chickens from KFC. But in the Middle East, they still have this culture, and in Africa, they still have this culture where it's a big deal if you run out of food, and if you run out of wine, or run out of drinks. And a side note here, I don't know, how many of you have attended Church of God more or less all your life? Anyone? Probably not as many used to. And the Church of God was a holiness movement for most of the 1900s. And amongst other things, playing cards, wearing makeup, women dressing a certain way, one of the rules we had was no alcohol. So the way we taught the Bible, when you got to a passage like this, was that they were either A, drinking wine because the water wasn't clean. Turns out that's not exactly true. Or B, the wine they were drinking was more akin to grape juice. But it turns out the Greek here is a word for wine. So it's my belief that you shouldn't draw a line where the Bible hasn't. So you just have to read the text for what it says. And these people, the wine they're talking about here is wine. And not only that, it says here that the water that was turned into wine, this particular wine The host says, "Why did you save the good stuff for the end?" So this wasn't the Walmart boxed wine at the end. It was the stuff that's 20, 30 bucks a bottle. And so he's just amazed by it. I have deviated away from my notes here. But so Jesus responds, and there's some details here that just kind of baffle us. Aside from doing the miracle here, his response, it should be noted, this use of the word woman. In our culture, that's not a respectful term. That is a term that is disrespectful. But in this culture, it means more like dear woman, and it's kind of a translation issue. In the ESV, it's very word for word, so it just conveys as close to the English as possible. But the spirit of the meaning is dear woman or lady. And then there's the secondary phrase there, my time is not come, or my hour is not. As we study through the book of John, we're going to see that he uses this phrase more than once. And it's this idea that Jesus is on a timetable, and it's the Father's timetable. He's going to the cross. And it's almost as if Mary, who knows his identity, is saying, okay, we got this scenario here, Jesus. Why don't you show your stuff? And in a way, he's saying, I will show who I am when it is the proper time, and not by any human timetable. And with his response, it seems actually very odd that he performs a miracle. But he does, and it amazes the people there, and it also amazes his disciples. John makes it pretty clear what this event signified. He uses the term sign and not miracle. The NIV does use the term miraculous sign, but that's not how the text reads. I think the importance of the word sign, as it says here, is it points to who Christ is. It says that he manifested his glory. When Jesus performed these signs, he was doing it to show who he was. In certain Christian circles and in certain parts of the world, the miraculous is emphasized when it comes to the Christian experience. And I think a lot of times the miracles seem more to build up the people, building the churches, or to make the people feel better than it is to have God be glorified. And I believe John's use of the term here, sign, points to the fact that Jesus is showing his glory, and his disciples believed. It seems very strange, as this says this was his first sign. I was reading R.C. Sproul's commentary on this, and it seems almost profane. He says it seems almost profane that the very first miracle, the very first sign performed by Christ, is a seemingly, as compared to his other miracles, the seemingly trivial act of turning water into wine. He would raise the dead. He would heal the sick. He would calm the weather. But we see, or at least potentially see, the symbolism here of Christ's ultimate mission. Because he turned the water into the wine. And we see later that for the Christian, wine does not necessarily represent what you drink after a hard day of work and after you put the kids to bed, but the blood of Christ in the communion service. So what the water, it was said that John drank water, John the Baptist. I'm pretty sure John the disciple drank water too. But John the Baptist came drinking water, and he represented the old covenant. And Jesus is saying, showing in this miracle that the new covenant of his blood, sealed by his blood, that there's a change happening. This is a sign pointing towards his messiahship. So what do we do with this story of Jesus turning water into wine? I don't have, this was a difficult text, and I went back and forth what to do. A lot of preachers like to do 3-point sermons or have these outlines, and it's difficult to do that with a story like this because it's not particularly meant as a teaching passage. So my rule in that case is to just teach what the text says. And the only application I can get from this is that in this story, Jesus is willing to provide for the needs of the host of this party. And in our lives, he is willing to provide for our needs. Secondly, and you can put that other slide up, we shouldn't be seeking a miracle for our own sakes. When we see Jesus work supernaturally, it's to point towards his glory and the person that he is. Signs pointing towards Christ and who he says he is. The one who healed the sick and raised the dead. The one who sought the outcast and ministered to the least of these. The one who took on corrupt religious leaders and embraced sinners. The one who willingly died on a cross for our sins and rose on the third day, so we will one day be raised. The one who will one day rise all of us and put right what we've all put wrong. Father,